What's up, movement pros? So in this video, we're going to go over the markers of progression for kettlebell cleans, and that allows us to know when we're ready to progress through the movement mastery phases. So with any movement, we're looking at 4 different markers of control. Do we have pain with the movement, breath control, postural control, impact control? So with pain, some common areas that we might see with the clean could be the elbows and the forearms and just having to catch the weights up there. Certainly going through the legs, could be the back, just like we might do with any hinge-oriented motion. We might see some of that. Sometimes the elbow also gets involved with the rack position. So if we're looking at breath control, just like we look at with the swing, deadlift, we have a couple different options here. If the weight is really heavy, we start at the bottom here, and if I'm doing this from a swing version, I'm going to take a big breath in at the bottom, fill my imaginary weight belt, and then give a nice powerful exhale to clean them up. All right, and then I'm going to take that breath in again as I go through. So I'm filling up here. And just as I'm extending the hips here, that's where I get that powerful exhale. All right, if it's a little bit easier, I want to flow a little bit more. I may not take a big breath on the way down. I just sort of don't breathe in and then time a little less aggressive exhale right as I extend those hips. And then if they're really light and I could flow for a while, I'll just keep a nice conversational breath. Just go with the flow. Or if I'm not talking, a nasal breath where I keep the tip of the tongue behind the 2 front teeth, lips slightly closed, teeth not touching. So depending on the intensity of the exercise, your breath control will change. If I'm doing a dead start rep, very much like a deadlift, but a powerful deadlift, I get down, breathe into my imaginary weight belt, and then I'll give it a or some type of hiss breath right as the hips extend. I'm trying to time that hip extension to some type of powerful exhale. All right, so if we're looking at postural control, some things that we're going to look at, for one, just the placement of the bells as we come up from a dead start position. I'm usually starting those weights by the heels or even behind the heels, because the key is to keep the weights as close to the body as possible. So major compensations are here. They go away from me and then I have to pull them in. I want these to stay right up the body, as tight as I can to the body. So in slow motion, the arms, the elbows actually come a little bit behind the body, and then I end up finding my front rack. I don't want to pin my arms to the body and then have to lean back and pull them in. I want the elbows to come behind, and then I circle them up, keeping everything as tight to the body as possible. That's usually the key. As I swing them through the legs, same rule applies. I want to keep them as tight to the body as possible. So that means my wrists will basically touch my inner thighs. There's no daylight between my wrists and forearms and my groin as I go through. And that keeps the weights as close to the body as possible. Okay, so oftentimes you'll see a lower swing, and then that creates a bigger casting away from the body. So we want to try to minimize that as much as possible. If you see that happening, try to make it a little bit easier and regress through the movement mastery section. Other things that we might see is as we're swinging, we may get a little squatty. So generally we want this to be somewhat of a hip hinge. My butt is back, shoulders and head are still higher than my hips, but we can get a little squatty, which ends up looking like this, where we come through and we dip the weights down as opposed to swing them back. And then it looks more like that as opposed to getting that momentum of hinging back. So if we're doing the continuous version, we don't want to drop down into a squat. We want to keep this hinge, and then we control the hinge to get a little bit more vertical as we come through there. When we're doing the dead start, we might start with our hips a little bit squattier, and we just come up. And then when we put them down, we don't want to slam them down and go into the ground excessively. We want to go with them, control them, stand back up, or we don't have to stand back up. We just regroup, take as much time as we need here, go with them. So we control our impact to the ground on the way down. As we're going through the continuous version, we don't want that weight to yank us forward, knock us off balance. Feet are always grounded, so if we get pulled to the front of the feet, we've lost position a little bit. A lot of times that happens if we're casting the weights out too much. We'll get pulled to the front of the feet, or we're gripping excessively, feeling the heels rise up. We want those feet to stay really grounded. Another thing you might see is as you're doing your propulsion upward, the heels may come up, thinking like that's a way to get a little bit more propulsion. But generally with these movements, we want to think about driving our feet down through the ground as opposed to getting the feet off the ground. But generally, if we do that, what tends to happen is we move forward as opposed to creating as much extension upward. So thinking about driving the feet down through the ground is a better option than thinking about trying to do some type of heel raise and getting our heels off the ground. If you have any questions, you can reach out directly. Send some videos. That's usually very helpful so that we can share it with the group in the forum, and then everybody gets benefit.